Hey guys, thanks for joining me this week. We're going to be talking about history of women in leisure. So we're going to go a couple hundred years back, talk about a couple of things, and definitely the main thing is we're going to examine how women experienced leisure in the past so we can get some answers of why there are some differences and similarities today. So we're going to do a quick summary and then we're going to dive deep into these things. So you guys ready? Let's go. Okay, so let's first talk about the history of the United States and the world. If you consider it's very, very limited talking about women. There was no famous books or anything written about women or anything. Think about it, even the Bible. None of the books were chosen to be put in the Bible that were written by women. Everything has been very male dominated for a very long time. And anytime that we've heard of history about women, anything, it's always as a side kicker to the main male history. So you have a big story about this, a little bit about that. And you have a big story about this, and a little bit about that, about women this way. So there's not really that much information that we have about it. And many of the activities that women were responsible for, such as caring for kids or holiday parties, they were not really a leisure thing. They really were more of a work. If you guys have ever been part of a Thanksgiving dinner and helped putting it together, you guys know it's not 100% easy. It's definitely a big trial and very difficult to do. So a lot of these activities that were considered our leisure activities were another form of work. And of course, leisure was described a lot. You know, the main people that were involved in leisure activities in history were the middle to upper class white women. You know, there was a little bit of a benefit as there was an increase in industrial times. There were more opportunity for women to get out of the house and do activities such as movie theaters, you had dance halls, you had different types of recreational parks, things of that sort. So there was, you know, a little bit more later on, definitely later on, where women would have an opportunity to have something fun to do on the side. So one of the main things is that women have been excluded from the public sphere for a very long time. And public sphere, what I mean by that is, you know, working in jobs, running for elections, being seen in the public eye. And because most of the women were in the private sector, a lot of it were in the private sphere. They were staying at home, they wouldn't leave the house, they would go to church on Sundays, come back. There was very little that women did that was not outside their private circle. So we have more about stuff like that. And of course, the very few women that have been able to have famous part of history be acknowledged usually have been either A, women who never had kids, or B, women who had to push aside the maternal role and push away their family and focus on whatever major thing that they did that got seen by the history eye. So, you know, many of the very famous men were fathers, had big families, things of that sort. But any woman, to be able to cut it and be famous, they almost had to push away their family to be able to see in the spotlight. So just think about that a little bit. And of course, one of the big things that we did see in history that we'll talk about a little bit later is about World War II and how women joined the workforce temporarily. So we'll talk about a little bit about that. One of the things that we want to talk about is the role that culture plays in the leisure activities. You know, every single culture varies a little to little. You know, one of the biggest things that we recently saw in history, if you guys are watching the news, is that Saudi Arabia now officially allows women to drive cars. Which if you think about, that's for us women in the United States, that's such a normal thing to do, to jump in the car. But what you guys don't realize is being able to drive a car gives you the opportunity and the freedom to do anything that you want, including more leisure activities, meet your friends, go out for drinks. And Saudi Arabia is now given the opportunity for their women to do this. So that's a pretty big step in that community for the women. So hurrah, good job, ladies. And so many times women will choose an activity not because, quote, they can't physically do it, is because they're scared of the reaction of what society will say. So think about that for a second. It's their own personal choice why they don't want to get involved in the activity. So, you know, one thing that I want you guys to all think about, you know, they'll say stuff like, oh, women can be involved in this, women can do that, but women will consciously choose not to. So one thing that we do notice is that all histories seem to have one thing in common. All histories, all cultures and things of that sort, is that we as women are seen as the weaker sex. And there's some truth to that. And if you consider the body of a woman, we are physically and biologically not as strong as men. And I can verify it with you guys. I'm not as physically strong as men. You know, so our bodies are shaped slightly different. Average size, we're, I think, 4 inches shorter than men. You know, and our bodies are just not built with the upper body strength that men do. And you know what? That's okay. You know, because there's things that we as women outshine men 100 to 1. And one of the biggest things that we women, and I know that I'm is we're amazing at multitasking. While men, they're very good at focusing on one task, and that's their one task. But what this weaker sex did was that it made all these stories that were passed down through history of women, they almost idolized women, and they made them what's called female goodness. That's a very important word for you guys, female goodness. And what female goodness is this ideal, perfect image of what a woman should be. And if you guys remember through some of your history books and stuff like that, a lot of the very ancient cultures had larger women, very curvy, because they were childbearing women. And that was one of the main stages of life that women were a focus on. That was one of their biggest, I guess societies would say almost purpose to women, was to have childbearing hips and to be seen as women who could further the next generations. You know, so this ideal image of a woman that we're talking about really had a couple, it's almost like a double-edged sword in many ways. It was mainly the middle to upper class white women and what they were the ones that were, quote, considered perfect. You know, and what that did by having this perfect woman, slender, perfect hits, absolute perfection. You know, she had to be obedient to a man. She had to be breathtakingly beautiful. If you guys see a lot of the Greek statues, you have these beautiful women, their hair flowing and gorgeous. You know, they had to have the perfect hourglass figure. They had to be beautiful, but yet still, don't forget those childbearing hips, but absolutely beautiful. You know, they wanted to have a pale face and skin that's perfect. And, you know, and this set, this porcelain white perfection, perfect body set a humongous high standard for all women of all cultures. You know, and if you didn't match this perfection, you were looked down upon pretty much in all societies. And of course, not just other white women were judged to this level. You know, all women were judged to this porcelain white skin and perfect hair and things of that sort. And one of the groups that really saw a very comparable comparison and this bar being set so high is the black women. And as you've seen through cultures, through history, you'll see a lot of these women, there's a big part of black history where the lighter skin, the better. That meant that you worked inside the houses, that meant that you were higher class, and then there's a whole different level of hair, and you can't have your natural hair, you have to have long, flowing, white women, middle to upper class, ideal woman hair. And that's still something that's being struggled with these days. There's an amazing documentary called Good Hair, and I highly recommend everybody sees it because it talks about this struggle that the black community has to trying to reach this perfect, ideal woman figure that the societies have set for everybody. And of course, to tie up to this, women should not do leisure activities. Because if you did anything leisure-wise, you know, you could have the risk of bruising yourself, you could hurt yourself. And one of my favorite things that I heard was that, quote, you could shake up your ovaries and your uterus. So we definitely don't want that to happen. So these are all things where the people would look down upon women being involved in leisure activities because you definitely don't want to get darker in the sun. You don't want to hurt yourself, and heaven forbid you shake those ovaries up. So I want you to stay calm and everything. So